Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our 3-part market update. In part 1, we discussed the global economy and the change in the consumer. In this section, we're going to focus on the U.S. jobs market and what's happening with the employment picture. This is an area full of political posturing and misinformation, so we hope that this information sheds some light on truth and what's really going on in the jobs market. Thank you for joining us for the second segment of our 3-part market update. In part 1, we discussed global economic momentum and how the consumer is driving growth. In this segment, we will discuss the status of employment and wages here in the U.S. This subject is full of misinformation and political posturing, so we hope that this conversation will shed some light on some of the facts around employment here in the U.S. There's a lot of ways to measure employment, and you might see the headlines about the unemployment rate, total job creation month by month. One way that we like to look at employment and try to understand, are we really at full employment? What's the status of jobs in the U.S.? Is we look at job openings. And so what you can see is since the recession, the number of job openings has more than doubled. And we're right now at about 5.5 to 6 million job openings in the country right now. That's a sign of a very tight labor market. And employers are really having a tough time finding good employees.
In fact, what we like to say is more people are looking for workers than people are looking for work.
Along with that, another good sign of the job market around the country is that the quit rate is at pre-recession highs. Now, what's the quit rate? This is basically how often are people quitting their jobs looking for greener pastures. People don't quit their jobs during recessions. People don't quit their jobs when the job market is difficult. What they're doing right now is they're out there looking for higher wages, maybe willingness to move to a new city because the job opportunities are there. So the job market as a whole is in a much healthier place than maybe some people give it credit for. One area of a lot of confusion, I would say, is the area of retail jobs. We've all seen the headlines about stores like Macy's, JCPenney, Sears closing outlets and wrapping up their businesses. And so the assumption is that retail jobs are being lost at an extreme rate. Well, that's not really the case. If you look at this chart that goes all the way back to 2007, you can see that retail jobs on the whole have been on an uptrend since we bottomed out back in 2009. The change here is because of changing consumer preferences, those jobs are not in the traditional retailers that we might think of. So when you look at this chart, you can see towards the top, total retail jobs have had a net gain over the last several years. What we've seen is a growth in areas like motor vehicles and non-store retailers. Now, non-store retailers is Amazon and other online retailers, whereas at the bottom of this chart, department stores, electronics and appliance stores, they're all struggling and they're having to close. So the net jobs are a gain, but the headlines are all around that bottom half, where we're seeing a lot of job losses. So again, this is a simple response to the consumer and our preferences to buy things online, with the exception of maybe a few areas like health and personal care stores, which is like your Walgreens and your CVS. With that job growth, we've actually seen overall hourly earnings on a strong uptrend. Now, this is big because people can't spend more unless they're making more. And as we discussed in segment 1, we need consumers to be spending to grow the economy. And what you can see here is average hourly earnings has been on a very strong uptrend with a strong increase in that trend in the last 2 years. That has not left out the blue-collar worker. We've seen a lot of headlines recently that all the wage growth has been in more white-collar jobs, but actually that's not true. Blue-collar workers have had a pretty generous increase, again, with a big change in the last couple of years where that trend has increased, and we're seeing good, strong wage growth amongst the blue-collar segment. There has been a shift in overall job growth. There's a lot of talk right now about trying to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., which is a lofty goal, and in certain parts of the country would be very much welcomed. What we've seen is for the last several years, in particular in the last probably 2 to 3 years, we've seen most of the new jobs are coming from those top 2 segments you see on this chart. The first one, education and health services, and the second being professional and business services. Both those categories experiencing good year-over-year job growth. As you move to the bottom of this chart, you can see manufacturing is down a little bit, and mining and logging is down a little bit more. That's mostly actually associated with oil field workers. As oil prices have dropped, that area has lost a lot of jobs. But overall, you can see the significant net gain, and most of it at the top in two very reasonable to high-paying categories where people are making living wages, which is a very good thing.
And those numbers in parentheses are the average hourly wage for those particular, that particular sector of the job market.
Yep. So we like to say it's not all burger flippers, as some people would complain. And it's also not all part-time. We left out the chart today, but most of this growth has been in good full-time employment, the kind of benefits, the kind that comes with benefits, along with that good wage. So that wraps up the second segment on employment and wages. Please feel free to join us for segment 3, as we'll talk about stock prices and the interest rate environment as the Fed increases rates over the next few years.